I visited home a week before Halloween. The county fair was in town, so one night, I took my little sister and her two friends who were in middle school. The fair was fall and Halloween themed, so there was a haunted house. I had been to the fair a bunch of times, but I'd never been allowed to go in there. Naturally, I tried to convince my little sister and her friends to go through it with me. They were too scared by all the bloody, psycho-looking actors lurking outside. So, I had to go along with them on all the same boring rides until eventually, they got hungry. I was the only one with money, so I was able to convince them to go through the haunted house with me by promising to buy them all whatever food they wanted afterwards. We got in line together, and I was immediately feeling the unsettling vibes of the haunted house. I couldn't help but feel like all the scare actors were staring at me, but my little sister and her friends were already terrified, so I hid the fact that I was uncomfortable. It took us about 20 minutes of waiting for everyone to go in one by one, but then, when we reached the front, the girls wanted to back out. However, I managed to make a deal with the girl that was letting people through that I would go in first and then come back around to prove it was okay, and whoever was behind them could go through ahead of them until they were ready. After settling things, I entered the haunted house alone, finding myself lost in a dark, claustrophobic maze of narrow hallways filled with fake smoke. The only lighting came from the obvious spots where some guy with a chainsaw or machete would jump out. I got scared once or twice, but it wasn't that bad as the actors would usher me forward right after. Then, as I was going down the longest stretch of hallway, I was suddenly shoved from my right. I was caught off guard and tumbled to my left, collapsing to the floor just as a door slammed shut. I was sealed off in total darkness. I wasn't sure if this was still part of the experience, so I quietly asked if anyone was there. A voice that sounded like an old woman asked in reply, "Can I borrow your shirt?" I freaked out and instantly got back on my feet. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but when I looked around, I realized I was in a tiny storage room filled with nothing but mannequins. They were all pointed to look at me in the center of the room, and half of them were wearing costumes like the scare actors, while the rest were completely bare. I couldn't see the exit or the woman, so I shouted at her to show herself. That's when she said, audibly smiling, "Check your eyes, dear. I'm right here." I snapped around to look at where the voice came from. She stood among the mannequins, as pale as their plastic skin, but wrinkled and sagging. She wore nothing on the top half of her body but a lacy red bra. I asked her who she was, but as I was speaking to her, the door behind me quickly opened and shut again. I turned around again to look in that direction, unable to see anything as the woman kept talking to me. She said, "My son says I should cover up because I'm too old, but you, on the other hand." I knew I was no longer alone in the room with this woman. There could have been any number of people lurking behind the mannequins, but my phone's flashlight was too useless to reveal them no matter how much I spun around looking. Finally, however, I was able to find the door I had fallen through. Just as I heard the first footsteps around me, I screamed and ran for it. I managed to get the door open with my left hand, but somebody grabbed my other wrist and started to pry my phone away. I turned to them and kicked as hard as I could. They staggered back, but in my rush to claw my way out through the door, I dropped my phone. I didn't have time to care, I just ran. Right outside the door, I collided straight into someone. We scared the shit out of each other before I realized he was just a regular person going through the haunted house. But I didn't linger. I shoved him out of the way and started sprinting back to the front. The actors kept yelling at me to stop going the wrong way, but I ignored them all. Finally, I came out the front entrance and started yelling at the attendant that something was horribly wrong. Sadly, she just looked at me like I was crazy. I realized everyone was gawking at me, trying to hold back their laughter as they thought I'd gone hysterical after getting scared by the haunted house. Then, I noticed my sister and her friends were gone. I shook the attendant until she told me that one of the actors had scared them off. Then I went looking for them frantically. I was scared to death they had been grabbed by the same people, but then I found them at a food truck. I asked them what they were doing there, and they said the man inside was giving them free churros. I could tell by the smile on that creepy old sicko's face that there was something sinister going on with him too, so I ripped them all away and took them home. They complained the whole way, but I wasn't going to risk being there for another second. To this day, nobody fully believes me when I tell them what happened that night. Even I sometimes catch myself wondering if the whole thing really happened the way I remember it, but I know better. That fair group is full of creeps who come to town to prey on women and girls, like that perverted old woman and her psychotic son, and that man in the food truck luring them in with free treats. The rest of the employees are just enablers who work to isolate the victims and turn a blind eye to what happens to them.